The judge looked at my ex-husband, then at me, then back at the stack of documents that had just been entered into evidence. Her reading glasses caught the fluorescent light as she flipped through page after page, her expression shifting from neutral to curious to something that looked almost like disbelief. "You're nothing without me." That's what Marcus had said the night he told me he wanted a divorce. Those exact words delivered with such casual cruelty that they'd lodged themselves in my chest like shrapnel. "You're nothing without me." Like I was an accessory he was discarding. Like 15 years of marriage could be summarized in 5 words of dismissal. He'd said it again during mediation. Said it to his lawyer, his friends, his new girlfriend. Posted about it on social media without naming me directly. But everyone knew who he meant. Poor Marcus, saddled with a wife who couldn't function without him. Lucky Marcus, finally free to find someone who appreciated his success instead of riding his coattails. Now he was sitting at the defendant's table in his $3,000 suit, watching Judge Eleanor Chen read through evidence that contradicted everything he'd ever believed about our marriage. Watching his attorney flip frantically through notes, looking for something to object to, finding nothing. Watching his carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. "Mrs. Holloway," Judge Chen said finally, looking at me over the rim of her glasses. "Can you confirm that these documents represent complete and accurate records of your contributions to Holloway Hospitality Group during your marriage?" I straightened in my chair. "Yes, Your Honor. Every contract, every client relationship, every operational decision. It's all documented." "And Mr. Holloway," the judge turned to Marcus, "you were unaware of your wife's role in these matters?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. "We were not provided adequate time to review these documents, Your Honor. We request a continuance to properly analyze this new evidence." Judge Chen smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Mr. Whitaker, your client has testified repeatedly that his wife had no involvement in his business. That she was, and I quote, just a housewife who spent her days at the spa." She gestured at the documents. "These records suggest otherwise." I'd like to hear his explanation. Marcus's face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic. The man who had called me nothing was finally realizing that I was, in fact, everything. Everything he'd claimed as his own. Everything he'd built his reputation on. Everything he was about to lose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Because you need to understand how a woman everyone underestimated managed to document 15 years of invisible labor and present it in a courtroom so compellingly that even the opposing counsel couldn't object. You need to understand how I went from being nothing to having everything. My name is Vivian Holloway. I'm 42 years old, and until 8 months ago, I was married to Marcus Holloway, founder and CEO of Holloway Hospitality Group, one of the fastest-growing boutique hotel chains on the East Coast. 12 properties in 7 states. Revenue of approximately $90 million annually. A reputation for exceptional service and unique guest experiences. Marcus got the credit for all of it. The magazine profiles, the industry awards, the speaking engagements. He was the face of Holloway Hospitality, the visionary entrepreneur who had built something remarkable from nothing. He gave interviews about his business philosophy, his leadership style, his secret to success. He never mentioned me. Not once. Not in 15 years of marriage and 12 years of building the business together. Because, according to Marcus, I hadn't built anything. I had just been there, present but not participating, existing but not contributing. A wife who enjoyed the lifestyle his success provided without doing anything to deserve it. That's the story he told. That's the story everyone believed. That's the story that made my blood boil every time I heard it. The real story was different. The real story was that I had been the operational backbone of Holloway Hospitality since the day it was founded. That I had managed the properties, trained the staff, developed the service standards, handled the crisis management. That I had built the guest experience that made our hotels famous. While Marcus smiled for cameras and collected accolades. The real story was that I had documentation of every single contribution I'd made, organized and cataloged and stored in a safety deposit box that Marcus didn't know existed. Because my grandmother had taught me something important when I was young, something I'd never forgotten. Keep records, she'd said. Keep records of everything you do, everything you're owed, everything that belongs to you. Because someday, someone will try to take it from you. And when they do, you'll need proof. Grandma had been married to a man who stole her family's farm out from under her through legal manipulation. She'd spent 20 years fighting to get it back, and she'd only succeeded because she'd kept copies of every document, every agreement, every piece of evidence that proved what was rightfully hers. She told me that story when I was 12 years old, and I never forgot it. 15 years of marriage to Marcus Holloway, and I documented everything. Every meeting I attended, every decision I made, every problem I solved, every client relationship I developed, every single contribution that Marcus would later claim as his own. I didn't know I would need it. Not until the night Marcus came home and told me he wanted a divorce. But when that night came, I was ready. More ready than he could possibly imagine. Let me tell you about the night everything changed. Because it's important to understand who Marcus was in that moment, who he'd become. Over 15 years of success and adulation and never being told no. It was a Thursday in March. I'd spent the day dealing with a crisis at our Charleston property, a burst pipe that had flooded 3 rooms and threatened to ruin a high-profile wedding that weekend. I'd coordinated repairs, relocated guests, negotiated with the wedding planner, and ultimately saved both the event and our reputation. By the time I got home, I was exhausted but satisfied. Another problem solved. Another day of keeping Holloway Hospitality running smoothly. Marcus was waiting in the living room. He was sitting in his favorite chair, the one that cost $4,000, and faced away from the television because he liked to look out at the garden when he was thinking. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, the expensive stuff he saved for celebrations or difficult conversations. "We need to talk," he said. I sat down across from him, still in my work clothes, still carrying the stress of the day. "About what?" "About us." He took a sip of his whiskey. "I've been thinking about this for a while, Vivian. And I've realized that we've grown apart, that we want different things, that it's time for both of us to move on." I stared at him. "Move on? I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us. I remember thinking that they should have hurt more, that I should have been shocked, devastated, blindsided. But the truth was, I'd been watching Marcus pull away for years. I'd been watching him rewrite history, minimize my contributions, present himself as a solo success story. I'd been watching him notice younger women, flirt at industry events, stay late at the office for reasons that didn't quite add up. I'd known this was coming. I just hadn't known when. "Why?" I asked, not because I needed the answer, but because I wanted to hear what he would say. Marcus sighed, the sigh of a man who was about to be honest in a way that would wound. "Because I've met someone else. Because I deserve to be with someone who appreciates me. Because I've carried this marriage for 15 years and I'm tired of it." There it was. The delusion that had been building for years, finally spoken out loud. "You've carried this marriage?" He nodded, oblivious to the irony. "I've built a company. I've provided a lifestyle. I've worked 60-hour weeks while you went to spas and had lunches with your friends. You've had a good life, Vivian. I gave you everything. But I can't keep doing this. I need a partner who contributes." I took a breath, held it, let it out slowly. I could have exploded, could have listed every contribution he was dismissing, every crisis I'd managed, every success I'd engineered. But I'd learned something important over 15 years of marriage to Marcus Holloway. Never argue with someone who's already decided they're right. Just document everything and let the evidence speak for itself. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. "From the divorce?" He looked relieved that I wasn't fighting, that I was being reasonable, that I was being the accommodating woman he'd always expected me to be. "I want to keep the business," he said. "It's mine. I built it. You can have the house, a reasonable settlement, enough to start over. But Holloway Hospitality is my legacy. That's non-negotiable." I nodded slowly. "And who decides what's reasonable?" "My lawyer will be in touch." He stood up, finishing his whiskey. "I appreciate you being mature about this, Vivian. I know it's hard to hear, but it's better for both of us. You'll see that eventually." He walked past me toward the stairs, paused at the bottom step. "I do care about you," he said without turning around. "I just can't be married to someone who needs me so completely. You're nothing without me, and that's not fair to either of us." Then he went upstairs to pack a bag, and I sat in the living room, surrounded by the house we'd bought together, the furniture we'd chosen together, the life we'd built together, and I thought about everything I was about to do. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what comes next is where I stopped being the accommodating wife Marcus expected and became the strategic opponent he never saw coming. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever been underestimated. I read every single one. Now let's continue. The next morning, I made coffee like nothing had happened. Marcus came downstairs with his overnight bag, looking almost disappointed that I wasn't crying or begging him to reconsider. "I'll be staying at the Ashford property for now," he said, naming our most luxurious hotel, "until we figure out the details." "That's fine," I said. "Take your time." He left, and I waited exactly 30 minutes to make sure he was gone. Then I got to work. The safety deposit box was at a bank on the other side of town, far from any of our usual locations. I'd rented it 12 years ago, when Marcus first started claiming credit for things I'd done. When the pattern became clear and my grandmother's voice started echoing in my head, "Keep records, keep proof. Someday you'll need it." The box contained 12 years of documentation, meeting notes in my handwriting, later confirmed by attendees, email printouts showing strategic decisions I'd made, performance reviews I'd written for staff members, client correspondence I'd handled, financial projections I'd created, crisis management records I'd maintained, vendor contracts I'd negotiated. It also contained something Marcus definitely didn't know about: records of the accounts he'd hidden, the investments he'd made without telling me, the property he'd purchased in his girlfriend's name, the systematic financial infidelity that had been going on for almost 4 years. I'd found it by accident, a statement that came to the house when Marcus was traveling. I'd opened it thinking it was something business-related, and discovered an investment account I knew nothing about. That discovery led to others. A private investigator I hired with money Marcus didn't track, bank records obtained through means I won't specify, a complete picture of what my husband had been doing while calling me a burden. He thought I was oblivious. He thought I was so focused on spa days and lunches that I hadn't noticed him stealing from our marriage. He thought I was nothing. He was about to find out how wrong he was. My first call was to a lawyer, not a family attorney, not a divorce specialist, a forensic accountant who had once helped me untangle a complicated vendor fraud situation at one of our properties. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo, and she was terrifying in the best possible way. "I need you to analyze everything in this box," I told her when we met. "I need you to document every contribution I made to Holloway Hospitality, every asset that should be considered marital property, and every hidden account my husband has been maintaining." Patricia looked at the stack of documents, then looked at me. She smiled, the smile of someone who loved a good puzzle. "How long do I have?" "As long as it takes to do it right. But ideally, less than 6 months. I'll have preliminary findings in 8 weeks." She was already sorting through papers, her mind clearly racing. "This is extensive documentation, Mrs. Holloway. Very thorough. My grandmother taught me," I said. "Keep records of everything." "Smart woman, your grandmother." "The smartest," I agreed. "And I'm not going to let her down." While Patricia worked on the financial analysis, I found a divorce attorney. Her name was Eliza Santiago, 54 years old, silver streak in her black hair, reputation for handling high-asset divorces with surgical precision. She'd represented 3 women whose husbands had tried to hide significant assets. She'd won all 3 cases. When I told her my situation, she listened without interrupting. When I showed her the documentation, her eyebrows rose higher and higher until they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "You've been planning this for 12 years?" she asked. "I've been documenting for 12 years, I corrected. I wasn't planning anything. I was just being prepared. In case, Mrs. Holloway," Eliza said slowly, "in 28 years of practice, I have never seen a client walk in with this level of preparation. You have timestamps, witnesses, corroborating documents. You have a paper trail that proves your involvement in every major business decision your husband claims to have made alone. I know. You have evidence of hidden assets, undisclosed accounts, property purchased with marital funds in his girlfriend's name. I know." She leaned back in her chair. "Your husband thinks you're nothing without him?" "That's what he said." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Then let's show him exactly how wrong he is." The next 6 months were a chess game played at a level Marcus never suspected. He continued to believe I was the helpless woman he'd married, the spouse who would accept whatever settlement his lawyers proposed because she was too passive to fight. He continued to stay at the Ashford property, conducting his affair openly now, introducing his girlfriend to staff and clients like she was already his wife. I let him believe it. I smiled when we had to communicate. I nodded when his lawyer sent preliminary proposals. I requested reasonable extensions, cited emotional difficulty, played the part of the overwhelmed soon-to-be ex-wife who needed time to process. Meanwhile, I was building my case. Eliza and Patricia worked together like a machine. They traced every hidden account, documented every concealed asset, built a comprehensive picture of Marcus's financial deception. They interviewed staff members who remembered my contributions, collected statements from vendors who had worked with me directly, gathered testimony from clients who knew exactly who had made Holloway Hospitality what it was. The picture that emerged was damning, not just of Marcus's attempts to hide assets, but of his entire narrative about our marriage. The story he told, the story of the self-made entrepreneur carrying his parasitic wife, was contradicted by evidence from dozens of sources. People who had seen me working, decisions that were documented in my handwriting, emails from my account solving problems Marcus claimed to have handled himself. Every lie he told was another thread we could pull. Every claim he made was another statement we could contradict. By the time we were ready for court, we didn't just have a case. We had an avalanche, but I'm not going to pretend those months were easy. They were some of the hardest of my life. I had to watch Marcus parade his girlfriend around town, had to smile and wave when mutual friends pretended not to notice, had to answer questions from people who assumed the divorce was somehow my fault, that I'd driven Marcus away, that I'd failed to keep him happy. The whispers followed me everywhere. I heard she just stopped trying. I heard she was spending all his money. I heard she never supported his dreams. People repeated Marcus's version of events because it was the only version they knew. The successful man, the demanding wife, the inevitable separation. My sister Julia was the only one who knew the truth. She'd helped me move boxes of documents, watched me spend nights organizing evidence, listened to me rage about the unfairness of it all. When I wanted to give up, she reminded me of Grandma. When I wanted to explode at Marcus publicly, she talked me down. Save it for court, she'd say. Save all of it for court. Let him think he's winning right up until the moment he realizes he's lost. I saved it. I saved everything. And when the court date finally arrived, I was ready to unleash 12 years of accumulated proof. Marcus arrived at the courthouse looking confident. Of course he did. He'd spent the last 6 months being told by his lawyer that this would be simple, that I'd been offered a fair settlement, that my refusal to accept it was emotional and unreasonable, that the judge would see through my attempts to claim credit for his success. His lawyer was a man named Bradley Whitaker, 60 years old, senior partner at a prestigious firm, known for protecting wealthy men from their wives' unreasonable demands. He'd handled high-profile divorces before. He'd never lost one. He was about to. I arrived with Eliza, both of us carrying boxes of documents. Bradley looked at the boxes with mild amusement. Whatever you have, Mrs. Holloway, I'm sure we can address it quickly. Mr. Holloway has been more than generous in his settlement offer. Eliza smiled at him. We'll see about that. The judge was Eleanor Chen, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her intolerance for financial manipulation. She'd presided over several cases involving hidden assets, and she'd always found them. The moment I learned she'd been assigned our case, I knew we'd gotten lucky. Bradley presented Marcus's case first. He painted the picture we'd expected: successful entrepreneur, supportive but uninvolved wife, reasonable divorce terms being rejected out of spite. He called Marcus to the stand. Mr. Holloway, Bradley said, can you describe your role in building Holloway Hospitality Group? Marcus straightened in his chair. I founded the company 17 years ago. I developed the business model, secured the initial funding, identified the properties, built the brand from scratch. Every major decision went through me. Every strategic direction was my vision. And your wife's role? Marcus hesitated for just a moment, too quick for most people to notice, but I saw it. He was deciding how to phrase it without lying directly. Vivian was supportive, he said carefully. She attended events with me. She helped with social aspects of the business. But the operations, the strategy, the actual work of building Holloway Hospitality, that was all me. Bradley nodded approvingly. And the current settlement offer? Is it fair? More than fair, Marcus said. I'm offering her the house, which is worth 2.4 million. I'm offering a monthly settlement that would allow her to maintain her lifestyle. I'm only asking to keep the business I built, the business that has nothing to do with her. Judge Chen looked at Eliza. Your cross-examination? Eliza stood. Mr. Holloway, you said your wife helped with social aspects of the business. Can you be more specific? Marcus shrugged. Dinner parties, charity events, the things wives do. I see. Eliza picked up a document. This is a guest satisfaction survey from your Savannah property, conducted in 2019. 93% of guests specifically mentioned the exceptional staff training and service standards as reasons for their positive experience. Do you know who developed those training programs? Marcus shifted. I developed them, with input from various team members. Eliza produced another document. This is an internal memo from 2016, with your signature, praising your wife Vivian for, quote, developing the service excellence program that has become the hallmark of our brand. You also wrote, quote, her attention to guest experience has elevated every property we operate. Marcus's face tightened. I was being generous, acknowledging her contributions. So she did contribute? She helped, in minor ways. Eliza pulled out a thick file. I have 27 similar memos, Mr. Holloway. 27 documents signed by you, praising your wife's contributions to operations, staff training, crisis management, and client relations. Were you lying then? Or are you lying now? Bradley stood. Objection. Badgering the witness. Judge Chen looked at Eliza. Rephrase. Mr. Holloway, did you write these memos? Marcus glanced at them. Probably. I wrote a lot of memos. And were the statements in them true at the time you wrote them? Long pause. I suppose so. Yes. So your wife did contribute significantly to the business operations? Marcus looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time since we'd entered the courtroom. And I saw something shift in his expression. Not quite fear, not yet, but the beginning of uncertainty. She contributed, he admitted. But I was the one who made the decisions. The final calls were always mine. Eliza smiled. Let's talk about those decisions. If you're still watching, hit that like button right now. Because what Eliza did next demolished every lie Marcus had ever told. I want you to stay for it. I want you to see what 12 years of documentation can do in the right hands. And tell me in the comments whether you've ever waited to reveal something important. Sometimes patience is the most powerful weapon we have. Eliza spent the next 2 hours systematically destroying Marcus's credibility. Every claim he made, she contradicted with evidence. Every decision he took credit for, she proved was actually mine. She presented the Charleston crisis management records, showing that I had handled the burst pipe situation, the guest relocations, the wedding rescue. Marcus had been in Miami at the time with his girlfriend. He hadn't even known about the crisis until it was resolved. She presented email chains where clients specifically requested to work with me, where vendors negotiated directly with me, where staff members reported to me on operational issues. She presented my handwritten notes from strategic planning meetings, corroborated by testimony from our COO, our CFO, and 3 property managers. All of them confirmed that I had been the operational heart of Holloway Hospitality for over a decade. Marcus tried to minimize, to deflect, to explain, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the time Eliza finished her cross-examination, his narrative had been completely dismantled. Then she called me to the stand. I had practiced my testimony with Eliza for weeks, not to lie or exaggerate, but to tell the truth clearly and completely, to explain exactly what I had done, how I had done it, and why it mattered. Mrs. Holloway, Eliza began, can you describe a typical day during your marriage? I worked, I said. Every day I worked. I was at the office by 7 a.m. earlier if there was a crisis. I managed operations for all 12 properties. I handled staffing issues, vendor relationships, guest complaints, training programs. I developed the service standards that became our brand identity. I did this for 15 years. And your husband's role? Marcus was the face of the company. He focused on fundraising, investor relations, industry events. He was very good at that part of the business. But the actual running of the properties, the day-to-day operations that kept guests happy and staff performing, that was me. Bradley cross-examined me aggressively. He tried to paint my contributions as exaggerated, my documentation as self-serving, my testimony as the bitter invention of a scorned wife. But he couldn't explain away the memos in Marcus's handwriting. He couldn't explain away the client testimonials. He couldn't explain away the staff witnesses who confirmed everything I said. And he definitely couldn't explain away what came next. Your Honor, Eliza said after Bradley finished with me, we'd like to present evidence regarding Mr. Holloway's financial conduct during the marriage. Judge Chen nodded. Proceed. Eliza called Patricia Okonkwo to the stand. Patricia, with her forensic accounting expertise and her calm, methodical presentation, laid out what she'd found in terms that were impossible to misunderstand. Mr. Holloway maintains 3 accounts that were not disclosed during financial discovery, Patricia said. The first is an investment account with a current balance of approximately $2.3 million. The second is a brokerage account with a current balance of approximately $1.7 million. The third is a money market account with a balance of approximately $800,000. Bradley was on his feet. Objection. This information was not provided in discovery. This is an ambush. Judge Chen looked at him coolly. Was this information requested in discovery? Eliza produced a document. We specifically requested complete financial disclosure, including all investment accounts, brokerage accounts, and liquid assets. Mr. Holloway signed a statement under penalty of perjury that his disclosure was complete. The gallery behind us was murmuring. Marcus was whispering urgently to Bradley. Judge Chen was looking at Marcus with an expression that could only be described as judicial displeasure. There's more, Patricia continued. Mr. Holloway has also purchased real estate that was not disclosed. Specifically, a beachfront condominium in his girlfriend's name, purchased with funds from the undisclosed investment account. The purchase price was $1.4 million. The murmur became louder. Bradley was still objecting, but Judge Chen waved him down. Is there additional undisclosed property? She asked Patricia. Yes, Your Honor. A second property, a townhouse in Charleston, also in the girlfriend's name. Purchase price of $780,000. And a vehicle, a Mercedes purchased 4 months ago, valued at approximately $110,000. All purchased with funds that should have been disclosed as marital assets. I looked at Marcus. His face had gone pale. His hands were shaking. The confident man who had walked into this courtroom expecting an easy victory was finally understanding what he was facing. Mr. Holloway, Judge Chen said, her voice icy, you signed a financial disclosure statement under oath. Are these allegations accurate? Bradley grabbed Marcus's arm. Don't answer that, Mr. Holloway, Judge Chen repeated. I'm asking you a direct question. Did you disclose these accounts and properties during discovery? Marcus swallowed. There may have been some oversight. He was calling $4 million in hidden assets and $2.3 million in undisclosed real estate and oversight. Judge Chen was not amused. We'll take a recess, she said. 30 minutes. When we return, I expect a complete explanation from Mr. Holloway regarding these discrepancies. And Mr. Whitaker, she looked at Bradley. I suggest you advise your client that perjury and fraud upon the court are taken very seriously in my courtroom. The recess lasted 45 minutes, during which Bradley and Marcus huddled in a conference room with what I can only imagine was a very tense conversation. When we returned, Marcus looked like a different person. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. What remained was a man who had finally realized he was not going to win. Mr. Holloway, Judge Chen said, would you like to revise your financial disclosure? Bradley stood instead. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that there were certain assets that were inadvertently omitted from the original disclosure. He is prepared to provide a complete and accurate accounting. Inadvertently, Eliza repeated. Your Honor, these omissions were not inadvertent. They were deliberate and systematic. Mr. Holloway opened these accounts specifically to hide assets from this marriage. He transferred funds specifically to avoid equitable distribution. And he lied under oath about their existence. Judge Chen looked at Marcus. Is this accurate, Mr. Holloway? Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, I want to speak to my attorney in private. Another recess. Another huddled conversation. When we returned this time, Bradley looked defeated. Your Honor, he said, my client is prepared to offer a revised settlement proposal. And suddenly, everything Marcus had planned, everything he had expected, everything he had believed about this divorce, collapsed. The revised offer was dramatically different from the original. Gone was the attempt to keep the entire business. Gone was the modest settlement he'd offered me as charity. In its place was an acknowledgement that I had contributed significantly to Holloway Hospitality and was entitled to a proportional share. But Eliza didn't accept it, Your Honor, she said. Given the evidence of financial misconduct, including hidden accounts, undisclosed property, and perjury, we believe the court should impose sanctions and adjust the distribution accordingly. Judge Chen nodded. I'm inclined to agree. Mr. Holloway's conduct has been egregious. The deliberate concealment of assets, the purchase of property in a third party's name to avoid disclosure, the false statements under oath, these are serious violations that warrant serious consequences. She looked at Marcus directly. Mr. Holloway, you came into this courtroom claiming that your wife was nothing without you, that she contributed nothing to your business, that she deserved only what you deigned to give her. The evidence tells a very different story. She gestured at the boxes of documents that had been entered as exhibits. Your wife was the operational foundation of Holloway Hospitality. She developed the training programs that earned your hotels their reputation. She managed the crisis situations that could have destroyed your brand. She built the client relationships that drove your growth, all while you took credit and called her nothing. Marcus was staring at the table. He couldn't meet the judge's eyes. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, you attempted to hide nearly $7 million in assets from this marriage. You purchased property for your girlfriend with marital funds. You lied to this court under oath. These are not the actions of an honest man. These are the actions of someone who believes he is above the rules. She picked up her pen. In light of these circumstances, I am ordering the following. All hidden assets are to be disclosed completely within 10 days. The properties purchased with marital funds are to be sold, with proceeds included in the marital estate. Mr. Holloway is sanctioned $50,000 for discovery violations and contempt. And regarding the division of assets, she paused, and the courtroom held its breath. Mrs. Holloway is awarded 65% of all marital assets, including a 65% stake in Holloway Hospitality Group. Mr. Holloway retains 35%. Additionally, Mrs. Holloway is awarded the family home, all personal property currently in her possession, and spousal support of $15,000 per month for a period of 5 years. The courtroom exploded. Bradley was objecting. Marcus was sputtering. But Judge Chen simply continued writing, ignoring the chaos. Mr. Holloway, she said finally, looking up at him with an expression of profound disappointment, you said your wife was nothing without you. I suggest you prepare to discover what you are without her. She signed the order. The gavel came down. And just like that, it was over. Marcus tried to speak to me as we left the courtroom. He pushed past Bradley, past the gallery observers, past my sister Julia, who had been watching from the third row. Vivian, wait, he said. We need to talk about this. This isn't fair. You can't take my company. I stopped and turned to face him. Really looked at him, this man I'd spent 15 years with, this man who had dismissed me and diminished me and told everyone who would listen that I was nothing. I'm not taking your company, Marcus, I said. I'm taking my share of the company I helped build. There's a difference. You didn't build this. I built this. You were just there. I smiled. The judge disagrees. The evidence disagrees. 27 memos in your own handwriting disagree. I think the only person who believes I didn't build this is you. And frankly, your opinion stopped mattering the day you called me nothing. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could hear Marcus, still protesting, still insisting that this wasn't right, still clinging to the narrative he'd constructed about himself and our marriage. But the narrative was broken now, shattered by evidence, disproved by documentation, destroyed by 12 years of my grandmother's wisdom, proven right at last. The aftermath of the court decision was complicated, as aftermath always is. Marcus appealed, of course. He hired new lawyers, argued that the judge had been biased, claimed that my documentation had been fabricated. But the evidence was too comprehensive, the paper trail to clear. His appeals went nowhere. The sale of the hidden properties was contentious. His girlfriend, whose name turned out to be Jessica Thornton, had to vacate both the beachfront condo and the Charleston townhouse. She was not pleased. She was even less pleased when she learned that Marcus had been planning to leave her too, eventually, once she became inconvenient. I'd found the evidence in his email archives, Messages he'd sent to a friend about how Jessica was fun for now but not wife material. History repeating itself. The Holloway Hospitality Group had to be restructured to reflect the new ownership. Marcus retained operational control of some properties while I took over others. It was awkward at first, working in proximity to someone who hated me as much as Marcus now did. But I had the staff on my side. They knew who had really been running things. They were happy to finally have that acknowledged. Within a year of the divorce being finalized, the properties under my direct management were outperforming the ones Marcus controlled. Our Charleston hotel won an industry award for guest satisfaction. Our Savannah property was featured in a national travel magazine. The reputation I'd spent years building was finally being credited to me. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling. Without me handling operations, problems piled up. Staff turnover increased. Guest complaints rose. The magic that had made Holloway Hospitality special was harder to maintain when the person who had actually created it was no longer doing the work. Eventually, he approached me about buying out his remaining share. He couldn't admit that he needed me, of course. He framed it as a desire to move on, to pursue other opportunities, to stop being tied to painful memories. But we both knew the truth. He was drowning without the operational expertise he'd spent 15 years taking for granted. I bought him out. Fair market value. No more and no less. It gave him enough money to start over somewhere else, doing something else. Last I heard, he was consulting for a real estate development company in Arizona. Jessica had left him. He was single again, starting over at 53, trying to rebuild a life without the woman he'd called nothing. I don't feel sorry for him. I know I probably should. I know that compassion and forgiveness are virtues, that holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it. But 15 years of being diminished and dismissed and told that I didn't matter, that leaves marks. Those marks don't disappear just because you win in court. What I do feel is something closer to peace. The knowledge that I was right, that I had contributed, that the evidence proved it and a judge acknowledged it, and no one would ever be able to tell me otherwise. The validation I'd waited 15 years to receive, finally granted by the legal system of the state of Georgia. My grandmother would have been proud. She died when I was 30, 8 years before my marriage ended. But she's the reason I won. Her voice in my head reminding me to keep records. Her story about the farm, warning me that people will try to take what's yours. Her wisdom, passed down across generations, proving itself true in the most dramatic possible way. Keep records, she'd said. Someday you'll need them. Someday had arrived. And the records had been enough. If you're still watching, I want to ask you something. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I have more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to be treated as less than they were. Stories about documentation and patience and the power of being underestimated. And leave me a comment telling me about your grandmother, or your mother, or your aunt, or whoever taught you the wisdom that saved you. We carry forward the lessons of the women who came before us. Sometimes those lessons are about cooking or cleaning or raising children. Sometimes they're about protecting yourself from people who would take everything you've built. My grandmother taught me to keep records. What did yours teach you? There's an epilogue to this story, because every good story needs an ending that looks forward, not just back. 3 years after my divorce was finalized, I sold Holloway Hospitality Group to a major hotel chain. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The work that had consumed me for 15 years had become something I needed to move beyond. The properties, the staff, the daily operations, they were all wrapped up in memories of Marcus, memories of being dismissed, memories of fighting to prove my worth. The sale price was substantial, more money than I would ever need, more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I put most of it into a foundation that supports women entrepreneurs, particularly those who are trying to build businesses while escaping abusive relationships. Women who are told they're nothing. Women who need help proving that they're something. I also travel now, properly travel, not the frantic business trips of my Holloway Hospitality years. I've been to Italy and Spain and Japan and New Zealand. I've seen things I only ever dreamed about seeing when I was too busy managing hotels to look up from my desk. And I've started writing. This story, the one you're hearing now, is one of many. I'm documenting, not just what happened to me, but what I learned from it. How to recognize when someone is diminishing your contributions. How to protect yourself when you suspect betrayal. How to keep records, like my grandmother taught me, so that someday you'll have the evidence you need. I spoke at a women's business conference last year. 1,000 people in the audience, all of them dealing with their own versions of what I'd experienced. Being overlooked, being underpaid, being told that their work didn't matter. Document everything, I told them. Every contribution you make, every idea you have, every success you're responsible for. Keep records, keep copies, keep proof, because someday, someone will try to take credit for what you've done. And when they do, you'll want to be ready. A woman came up to me afterward, tears in her eyes. My husband tells me I'm nothing without him, she said. He runs our business. I do all the work. He gets all the credit. Sound familiar? I asked. She nodded. Start documenting today, I told her. Every meeting, every decision, every contribution. Keep it somewhere he can't find it. And when the time comes, if the time comes, you'll have what you need. She hugged me, a stranger, hugging me in a hotel conference room because I'd given her something she hadn't known she needed. Not hope exactly. Something harder and more practical than hope. Strategy, tools, a roadmap for protecting herself. That's what I try to give now. Not just my story, but the lessons from it. The things I learned the hard way so that other women don't have to. I think about Marcus sometimes. Not often, and not with love or even with hatred anymore. Just with a kind of distant wonder at who he was and who I was when I was with him. At how easily I disappeared into his shadow. How completely I let him define my value. He called me nothing. And for a long time, I believed him. Not consciously, maybe, but somewhere deep down, some part of me accepted his assessment. Some part of me thought that if I just worked harder, contributed more, proved my worth more clearly, he would finally see me, would finally acknowledge what I brought to the table. But people like Marcus don't acknowledge. They take, they claim, they diminish and dismiss because it serves their narrative of their own greatness. No amount of contribution would ever have been enough to make Marcus see me as an equal. His ego required me to be less than him, and as long as I stayed, I would always be less. Leaving was the first step. Fighting was the second. Winning was the third. But the most important step was the one that came after. The step where I defined my own value, independent of Marcus's opinion, independent of anyone's opinion. The step where I stopped being nothing without him and became everything on my own. That's the real victory. Not the money, not the company, not the judge's ruling. The real victory is standing in my own life, owning my own worth, and knowing that I proved myself not to Marcus, not to the court, but to me. My grandmother would be proud. She fought for decades to reclaim what was taken from her. She taught me to keep records so I wouldn't have to fight as long. She passed down wisdom that saved me, wisdom I'm now passing down to anyone who will listen. Keep records, know your worth, and never let anyone tell you you're nothing, because you're not. You never were. And with the right evidence, you can prove it to anyone who tries to say otherwise. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I know it was long, but some stories need to be told completely, need to be understood from beginning to end. If this meant something to you, if it helped you or inspired you or made you think about your own situation differently, please share it. There are women out there who need to hear this. Women who are being told they're nothing by men who are threatened by their potential. Women who need to know that documentation is power, that patience is strategy, that the truth properly presented can defeat any lie. I was nothing without him. That's what Marcus said. The judge just handed me everything. That's how the story ended. But the real ending, the one that matters, is simpler than that. I was never nothing. I just hadn't proven it yet. Now I have. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now. You're going to love what happens next. I'll see you in the next one.